the night was cold and silent. Wind moved through the empty trees, carrying dust across the lonely hills. In that quiet place stood a small wooden cabin. Inside, an old lamp glowed weakly, its yellow light fighting against the darkness. The man who lived there was used to silence. He was used to being alone. His name was Daniel. For years, he had chosen this life, far away from the noise of cities, far away from people. His days were simple, hunting, gathering firewood, and fixing what little he owned. He had no family left, no friends who visited. Only the sound of his own footsteps and the whisper of the wind kept him company. But that night, something broke the silence. A sound. At first, he thought it was the wind shaking the loose boards of his cabin. Then he heard it again, soft, weak, almost like a cry. Daniel froze. His hand moved toward the old rifle leaning by the wall. He held his breath, listening. The sound came once more, this time clearer. It was not the voice of an animal. It was something different. Something desperate. He opened the door. The cold air rushed in, but Daniel did not feel it. His eyes searched the darkness outside. At the edge of the trees, half hidden by shadows, he saw movement. Small figures. They staggered, struggling to stand. Their shapes were not normal. Their heads seemed too large, their bodies thin and fragile. Daniel's first thought was fear. His heart beat fast, warning him to close the door and hide. For a moment, he almost did. The world had changed in strange ways in recent years. Soldiers often moved through these lands, hunting for things that did not belong. Daniel had heard rumors of creatures, strangers from the stars, but he never believed them. Until now. The figures stepped closer, stumbling as if their legs could no longer carry them. Moonlight touched their faces, and Daniel finally saw. Their skin was pale, almost silver, with faint blue lines glowing beneath the surface. Their eyes, large and shining, looked straight at him. Not with anger. Not with hate. But with fear. They were children. Daniel lowered the rifle slowly. His breath shook. The smallest one fell to its knees, shivering in the dirt. Another tried to pull it up, whispering in a language Daniel could not understand. The sound was soft, broken, almost like a song fading in the air. Daniel looked around. He knew soldiers often passed near these hills. If they found these children, whatever they were, it would mean death for them. He had seen how soldiers treated anything different, without mercy, without questions. He had two choices. He could close the door, pretend he saw nothing, and remain safe. Or he could open his door wider and let them in. His heart gave him the answer before his mind could argue. "Come," he whispered. His voice was rough from years of silence, but his hand reached out. Inside. The children hesitated. Their wide eyes searched his face, as if measuring if this human could be trusted. For a long second, no one moved. Then the smallest one reached out with trembling fingers. Daniel took its hand gently, pulling the fragile body toward the warm light of his cabin. One by one, the others followed. Inside, the cabin was simple: an old bed, a small table, shelves with food he had stored for winter. Daniel guided them to the fire. He wrapped them in blankets, poured water into a cup, and handed it over. They drank with shaking hands, their eyes never leaving him. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something stir inside him. Something he thought was gone forever. Care. He watched them carefully. They were young, maybe not older than human children of 10 or 12. Their faces carried exhaustion, but also trust. They whispered among themselves in their strange tongue, but when one of them touched Daniel's arm and gave a faint smile, he understood. They were thanking him. Daniel sat back in his chair, staring at the door. Outside, the night was still dark, but now it felt dangerous. He knew soldiers might pass this way. If they saw light in his cabin, they would knock. If they knocked and found these children inside, his life would be over. Yet he did not put them out. He did not even think of it. The fire crackled softly, filling the room with warmth. The children huddled close together, their eyes slowly closing as sleep took them. Daniel whispered to himself, almost in disbelief. What have I done? But deep in his heart, he already knew. He had given them shelter. He had given them what they had no one else to give. A home. Outside, in the distance, boots crunched over gravel. A voice shouted. Another voice answered. The sound of soldiers on patrol grew louder in the night. Daniel's blood ran cold. He looked at the sleeping children. He looked at the door. His chest rose and fell quickly as the sound of footsteps came closer. And then, a sharp knock shook the wooden door. Open up, a voice demanded. Light was seen from this cabin. Open, now. Daniel's heart thundered. The children stirred in fear, clutching at each other. The stranger had opened his door. And now, danger was standing right outside it. Daniel stood frozen as the hard fists pounded on the wooden door. The voice outside was sharp, carrying the authority of men who were used to being obeyed. Open the door, the soldier shouted again. We saw the light. No one is supposed to be out here. The children stirred, fear flashing in their large eyes. Their thin fingers gripped Daniel's sleeve like roots clinging to soil before a storm. Daniel's mind raced. If he opened the door, the soldiers would see them. If he didn't, suspicion would grow. Either way, danger was already inside his cabin. He took a deep breath, forcing his voice to stay calm. One moment, he called out, as if nothing unusual was happening. He turned to the children. Quiet, he whispered, his finger pressing against his lips. Then he pointed toward the small trapdoor beneath the rug. It led to a shallow cellar he had dug years ago for storing food. It was narrow, cramped, but hidden. The children understood. Their glowing eyes widened, and they moved silently, their fragile bodies slipping into the dark space. Daniel lowered the wooden hatch, pulling the rug back over it just as another loud knock rattled the door. His heart pounded. Daniel opened the door. Two soldiers stood in the moonlight. Their uniforms were dirty from travel, rifles slung across their backs. One held a lantern that cast a harsh glow into the cabin. The taller one squinted at Daniel. What are you doing out here, old man? The soldier demanded. Daniel's voice was steady, though his chest ached from fear. Living, he answered simply. The shorter soldier stepped forward, peering into the cabin. His eyes moved over the bed, the table, the shelves. The fire still burned, throwing shadows against the walls. You're not supposed to burn fires this late, the man muttered. Smoke can be seen for miles. It draws trouble. Daniel gave a short laugh, though it sounded hollow. Trouble doesn't visit me. Not anymore. The soldiers exchanged looks. Suspicion lingered in their eyes, but they saw only an old man and his lonely cabin. After a long pause, the taller one grunted. Fine. But if you see anything strange, anything not human, you report it. Understand? Daniel nodded slowly. I understand. The soldiers left, their boots crunching on the gravel until the sound faded back into the night. Daniel shut the door quickly, bolting it with trembling hands. His chest rose and fell heavily. Then he pulled the rug aside and lifted the hatch. The children's glowing eyes stared up at him from the darkness. It's safe now, he whispered. His voice was softer than he expected. Come out. They climbed back into the room, one by one. Their faces carried both fear and trust. Daniel realized they had no one else. No family. No soldiers to protect them. Just him. For days, he hid them. The routine became secret. At night, he gave them food, bread, dried meat, water. In the mornings, he taught them small words of English. They listened carefully, repeating after him with soft voices. One evening, the smallest one pointed at the fire and asked, "Home?" The word was broken, but Daniel understood. His heart squeezed. Yes, he said, his voice low. Home. He thought he had lost that word years ago. As the days turned into weeks, the bond grew. The children trusted him completely. When they were frightened, they hid behind him. When they were hungry, they waited silently for his hands to share food. They even began calling him something in their own tongue, guardian. But danger was never far. More soldiers passed through the hills, their lanterns glowing like angry eyes in the night. Sometimes Daniel watched from the window, holding his breath as the children crouched in silence beneath the floor. Each patrol carried the same posters, images of strange faces, warnings of alien threats. Daniel saw the drawings and recognized the children. His stomach turned cold. One mistake, one careless moment, and it would all end. One night, as the fire burned low, Daniel sat at the table with the children around him. Their large eyes glowed in the dim light, watching him closely. "You can't stay here forever," he whispered, mostly to himself. "They'll find you." The oldest child tilted its head, listening. Then it touched Daniel's hand gently, speaking in its soft, strange tongue. The words meant nothing to his ears, but the meaning was clear. They trusted him. That trust cut deep into his chest. For years, Daniel had lived without purpose. Now he had one. He would protect them, no matter the cost. But shadows were already moving against him. A week later, the sound of boots returned, louder this time, more of them. Soldiers searched the village nearby, banging on doors, pulling people outside, shouting questions. Daniel stood at his cabin window, his hands cold as stone. The children crouched silently in the cellar, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Daniel lowered the hatch and whispered, "Quiet. Don't move. No matter what happens." The soldiers' voices grew closer. This time, Daniel knew they would not just knock. They would come in. They would search. And if they found the children, his secret would be over. Outside, heavy boots stopped at his door. A hand slammed against the wood. "Open up, old man," a soldier barked. "We're searching every house tonight." Daniel's breath caught. His heart hammered against his ribs. He looked at the trapdoor one last time, then at the door shaking under the fists. He knew he could not hide this forever. The secret he carried in the dark was about to be exposed. The door crashed open before Daniel could even answer. Soldiers stormed into the cabin, their boots pounding the wooden floor, their rifles raised like teeth in the dark. Lantern light spilled across the room, searching every corner. "Stand aside," one of them barked, shoving Daniel back. "We have orders to search every house." Daniel's chest burned with fear, but his face stayed calm. He raised his hands slowly, showing he held no weapon. His eyes followed them as they tore through the cabin, pulling blankets off the bed, ripping open cupboards, kicking aside chairs. One soldier stomped across the rug. Daniel's heart clenched. Beneath it, the children lay in silence, not daring to breathe. The soldier paused, looking down. The rug bulged slightly, uneven from where Daniel had pulled it too quickly. Daniel stepped forward. "I told you, there's nothing here," he said firmly. "This is just my cabin. Empty. Always has been." The soldier's eyes narrowed. He pushed Daniel aside and pulled the rug away. The trapdoor was revealed. "Open it," the taller soldier ordered. Daniel's stomach turned to stone. The soldier bent down, reaching for the handle. Before he could pull it open, Daniel moved. With all the strength left in his aging body, he kicked the lantern from the soldier's hand. Flames scattered across the floor, and the cabin filled with shouts. "Fire," someone yelled. Smoke rose as the soldiers tried to stamp out the flames. In the chaos, Daniel threw himself against the trapdoor, covering it with his body. He shouted above the noise, his voice rough but strong. "There's nothing here. Just me. Search all you want, you'll find nothing but an old man's misery." The soldiers dragged him away, pulling his arms behind his back. One of them yanked the trapdoor open, shining a lantern inside. Empty. The children were gone. Daniel's eyes widened. In the chaos of fire and shouting, they had slipped away through the narrow tunnel he had dug long ago, when he used to bring food in during winter. Somehow, they had found it, crawling into the night unseen. Relief washed over him, even as iron shackles closed around his wrists. The soldiers cursed, furious at finding nothing. "You're hiding them," the officer snarled, shaking Daniel by the collar. "Where are they?" Daniel met his eyes with a calmness that surprised even himself. "I told you," he said. "There's nothing here. Nothing but me." They dragged him out into the cold night, his cabin burning behind him. Sparks rose into the sky like dying stars. Daniel did not look back. His only thought was of the children, running through the forest, free. The trial came quickly. Daniel stood in the center of a stone courtroom, chains heavy on his wrists. Soldiers filled the room, their eyes sharp and cold. The judge, an older man in a black robe, read the charges with a voice like iron. Harboring enemies of the state. Protecting non-human fugitives. Refusing to cooperate with authorities. "Do you admit these crimes?" Daniel lifted his head slowly. His voice was rough, but steady. "I admit this," he said. "I gave shelter to the lost. I gave food to the hungry. I gave warmth to children who had no one else. If that is a crime, then yes, I am guilty." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Some looked shocked, others disgusted. The judge slammed his gavel. "These creatures are enemies. They are not children, they are threats to our world. Why would you risk your life for them?" Daniel's eyes did not waver. He spoke words that came from deep inside, words that silenced even the murmurs. "Because they were afraid. Because they were small. Because they knocked on my door, and no one else would open it. They called me guardian. They called my cabin home. And I could not turn them away." His voice cracked, but he stood tall. The judge's face twisted with anger. "Then you leave us no choice." The sentence fell heavy in the room, heavier than the chains on Daniel's wrists. "Life imprisonment. You will die behind walls for your betrayal." Gasps filled the chamber. Soldiers dragged Daniel away, his steps heavy, but his heart strangely light. Because even as the chains cut into his skin, he carried a secret. The children were safe. His silence had bought them time. His sacrifice had given them a chance. Prison was a place without color. Gray walls. Gray floors. Gray faces. Daniel sat in his cell, the days blending into each other like endless fog. Food was thrown through a slot, and guards never spoke except to bark orders. At night, he lay on the hard bed and closed his eyes. He could still see their glowing faces, their eyes filled with trust. He could still hear their soft voices whispering that word, guardian. Sometimes he wondered if they had made it. Did they escape far enough? Did they find safety? Or had the soldiers hunted them down in the forests? He would never know. Years would pass. He would grow older, weaker. But inside, one truth stayed alive: he had given them something no prison could take away. A home. And though the world had judged him guilty, Daniel never regretted opening his door. Not once. The years in prison moved like shadows across the floor, slow, heavy, without mercy. Daniel had entered with dark hair and strong shoulders. Time stole both. His hair turned gray, his back bent, and his hands shook when he lifted his cup of water. Yet inside, in the place no chains could reach, he carried something the guards could never take away: memory. Every night, when the lights went out and silence wrapped the prison, Daniel closed his eyes. He saw the children huddled around the fire in his cabin. He heard their strange, gentle voices calling him guardian. Sometimes he woke with tears on his face, not from pain, but from longing. 25 years passed this way. He became part of the prison walls. Guards came and went, younger men replacing older ones, but Daniel remained. Some guards mocked him, calling him traitor. Others ignored him completely. But a few whispered when they thought he couldn't hear. They say he helped them escape. They say they were never found. They say maybe they lived. Those whispers were the only sparks in Daniel's gray world. One winter night, when Daniel's bones ached too much to sleep, he sat by the small barred window in his cell. Outside, the sky stretched wide, filled with stars. He whispered to them like he had done for years. "Are you out there?" he asked softly. His voice was weak, cracked from age. "Did you survive? Did you remember the man who gave you bread and fire?" The stars gave no answer. But Daniel kept whispering. He did not know if they could hear. Still, he hoped. In the 25th year of his sentence, the prison began to shake with rumors. Strange lights had been seen in the skies, bright, moving faster than anything human. Farmers in distant villages spoke of silver figures in the fields at night. Entire patrols of soldiers vanished without a trace. The guards laughed at the stories, but fear lingered in their eyes. Some whispered that the others had returned. Daniel listened in silence, his heart beating faster than it had in years. A thought grew inside him, wild and impossible. Could it be them? Could the children he once sheltered now be grown, alive, strong enough to return? The hope was dangerous, yet it refused to die. One morning, as the gray sun rose, Daniel was marched with other prisoners to the yard. His steps were slow, his body frail, but his eyes were sharp, searching the horizon. The guards shouted orders, but their voices trembled. Because above the yard, in the pale sky, a shape appeared. At first, Daniel thought it was just a cloud breaking apart. But then the shape grew larger, sharper, until the truth became clear. A ship. Massive, glowing with lines of silver and blue, its presence too powerful to belong to humans. Prisoners froze. Guards dropped their rifles in shock. The ship descended slowly, the air trembling with its energy. Dust swirled across the yard, and a deep hum filled the ground beneath their feet. Daniel's knees weakened. His eyes widened, filled with both fear and wonder. It was them. It had to be them. The ship stopped above the prison like a silent giant. A beam of blue light cut through the clouds, striking the yard. Everyone shielded their eyes, but Daniel stood still, his gaze locked on the brilliance. Figures stepped out of the light. Not children. Not fragile. But tall, strong beings with the same silver skin, the same glowing eyes. Their armor shimmered like starlight, and their presence made the guards stumble back in terror. Daniel's chest tightened. His breath caught. His heart whispered the truth before his mind could speak it. They had come back. The guards shouted, raising their rifles, but the weapons melted in their hands under a wave of blue energy. Prison walls cracked like dry wood, stone crumbling as if time itself obeyed the intruders. The leader of the silver figures stepped forward, their glowing eyes sweeping the prisoners. When they spoke, their voice was deep, steady, but full of emotion. "We seek the one who gave us a home." The yard fell silent. Guards and prisoners alike looked around in confusion. The leader's gaze found Daniel. Though his hair was white and his body weak, their eyes widened with recognition. "It is him," the leader said softly. Daniel's lips trembled. He tried to stand taller, but his legs shook. You lived," he whispered, his voice breaking. The leader walked toward him, and the other silver beings followed. They stopped before Daniel, and to everyone's shock, they bowed their heads. "You gave us food when we were starving," the leader said. "You gave us fire when we were freezing. You gave us shelter when the hunters closed in. You gave us home. For 25 years we carried your name, Guardian. We have not forgotten." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. The leader reached out, touching the chains on his wrists. A flash of blue light burst, and the iron shattered into pieces. For the first time in 25 years, Daniel's hands were free. The prisoners gasped. The guards fell to their knees in fear. Daniel looked down at his trembling hands, then at the faces of the beings before him. The smallest spark of a smile touched his lips. "I thought I would die here," he whispered. "I thought you had forgotten me." The leader's voice shook, though it carried the weight of power. "We never forgot. For every step we took in the stars, for every home we built, we remembered the man who first opened his door. Tears ran down Daniel's face. For 25 years, he had been prisoner, traitor, forgotten by his own kind. Yet in this moment, he was guardian again. The beam of light opened wider, surrounding him. The leader extended a hand. "Come with us. It is time." Daniel looked once at the prison walls around him, the gray stone that had been his world. Then he looked at the sky, where a ship waited like a promise kept. His hand, wrinkled and trembling, reached forward. And for the first time in 25 years, Daniel stepped into the light. The light wrapped around Daniel, warm and alive, lifting him gently from the cold prison yard. The guards shouted in panic, but their voices were drowned by the deep hum of the ship above. Dust swirled as the beam pulled Daniel upward, higher and higher, until the broken walls and frightened faces below became small. His breath came fast, his heart beating like a young man's again. For 25 years, he had dreamed of the sky. Now he was inside it. The light faded, and Daniel found himself standing on a wide silver platform. The floor glowed faintly beneath his feet, humming with energy. Around him, tall figures in shining armor bowed their heads in respect. Their glowing eyes watched him not as a prisoner, not as a traitor, but as something greater. One stepped forward, the same leader who had freed his chains in the yard. Up close, Daniel saw the faint scars across their silver skin, the marks of battles fought long after the children had left his cabin. Their voice was steady, but filled with emotion. "Guardian," they said. "Welcome home." Daniel's throat tightened. He looked around, unable to believe what he saw. The small, frightened children he once hid beneath his floor had grown into towering beings of power. Warriors, leaders, survivors. And yet, in their eyes, he still saw the same spark of trust he had once seen by the firelight of his cabin. I don't understand," Daniel whispered. "Why come back? Why now?" The leader stepped closer, lowering their head in respect. "Because 25 years ago, you gave us more than shelter. You gave us a chance to live. Every world we built, every victory we earned, it all began with your kindness. And now, it is our turn to free you." Daniel felt his knees weaken. For years he had been treated as nothing, a criminal locked away, forgotten. And now, before him, stood proof that his sacrifice had never been in vain. Below, the prison was in chaos. Guards screamed for reinforcements, prisoners pressed against the bars, staring in disbelief at the massive ship above. But nothing could touch it. The ship's energy pulsed like a living shield, untouchable by human weapons. On the platform, Daniel turned as more figures entered, aliens taller than him, their armor glowing like liquid starlight. Some carried banners, etched with symbols he could not read. Yet when he looked closer, his heart stopped. One symbol was simple, drawn with awkward lines. A circle with a line through it. He remembered it instantly. It was the mark the smallest child had scratched on his cabin wall with a piece of coal, 25 years ago. A mark that meant home. Daniel touched the symbol with shaking fingers. His voice broke. You remembered even this." The leader's glowing eyes softened. "We remembered everything." The reunion spread through the ship like fire. More of them came forward, speaking in their tongue, bowing, pressing their hands to their chests in respect. Daniel did not understand the words, but he felt the meaning in their voices. Gratitude. Honor. Love. One younger figure stepped forward, eyes bright. They knelt before Daniel and spoke in halting English. "You saved us," they said slowly. "We are, because of you." Daniel's tears fell freely now. He reached out, resting his trembling hand on the being's shoulder. His voice shook. "I only opened a door." The leader raised their head. "And in doing so, you opened the future." But outside, Earth did not welcome this return. Sirens wailed across the city. Military forces rushed to surround the prison. Tanks rolled through the streets, their cannons aimed at the sky. Fighters screamed overhead, circling the massive ship like wasps around a giant. On the ship's bridge, Daniel was led to a high window. He looked down at the gathering storm below, lines of soldiers, machines, weapons of war. The humans who had once chained him now prepared to strike at the ones who had freed him. Fear gripped Daniel's chest. He turned to the leader. "They will kill you. They will try. You must leave before." The leader lifted a hand gently, silencing him. "Guardian, do not fear. We did not come for war. But if they raise their hands against us, we will not bow." As if to prove the words, a tank below fired. The shell streaked upward, but it shattered like glass against the ship's invisible shield. A ripple of blue energy spread across the sky, harmless yet terrifying. Soldiers stumbled back, eyes wide with fear. Another shot, another ripple. Then silence. No human weapon could touch them. The leader looked down at the trembling army below. Their voice carried through the ship, calm yet filled with power. "Release your fear. We came only for him. He gave us home. Now, we give him back his life." Daniel pressed his hand to the glass, staring down at the land he had once called his own. The government had chained him, branded him a traitor. But here, in this moment, he was something else. A symbol. Prisoners in the yard below still shouted, their voices mixing with fear and awe. Guards cowered. Soldiers hesitated. And Daniel, frail and old, stood above them all, not by his own strength, but by the power of the ones he had once sheltered. His voice was a whisper, but every word carried weight. "I was forgotten by my own people, but remembered by strangers. Tell me, who are the real enemies?" No one answered. The leader turned to him, their eyes glowing brighter than the stars. "Come with us, Guardian. The sky is waiting." Daniel closed his eyes, letting the tears fall. He had given them bread, fire, a roof, nothing more. And yet they had carried him in their hearts for 25 long years. Now, they had returned, not as children, but as protectors. He looked once more at the broken prison, the land filled with fear, the world that had thrown him away. Then he looked at the ship, alive with light, filled with beings who called him guardian. His choice was clear. With slow, shaking steps, Daniel walked forward into the heart of the ship. And behind him, the sky trembled as if the universe itself welcomed his return. The ship soared higher, leaving the prison behind like a forgotten scar on the earth. Daniel sat in a wide chamber filled with soft light, his hands trembling against the armrest of the seat they had given him. For the first time in decades, there were no chains, no locked doors, no guards shouting orders. Only silence, and the quiet hum of power flowing through the ship's heart. The aliens, his children grown into warriors, moved around him with purpose, yet every time they passed, they bowed their heads slightly, as if reminding him that he was not their prisoner. He was their guardian. Daniel's eyes wandered across the chamber. The walls shimmered with moving patterns, flowing like water. Through the wide window above, Earth grew smaller, its blue oceans and brown lands fading into the darkness of space. For 25 years, he had been denied the sky. Now, it stretched endlessly before him. The leader approached, their silver armor glowing softly in the chamber's light. They carried no weapon, only a staff marked with old symbols. Daniel recognized one of them, the same crude circle and line mark from his cabin wall, carved long ago by a child's hand. The leader lowered themselves onto one knee before him. "Guardian, your chains are broken. From this day forward, you are free." Daniel swallowed hard, his voice cracking. "Free? I almost forgot what that word meant." "You will remember again," the leader said gently. But Daniel's hands still shook. "They will call me a traitor. The government will hunt me. My name will be cursed on Earth." The leader's glowing eyes softened. "On Earth, perhaps. But among the stars, your name will be sung." The ship glided farther from Earth, breaking through the last layers of its atmosphere. Daniel stared at the shrinking world. Memories filled his mind, his cabin by the woods, the frightened faces of children huddled around a fire, the knock at his door that had changed everything. He had once given them a home. Now, they had returned to give him one. And yet, a question burned in his heart. Why me? He asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. I was no hero. I was just a man in a broken house. I had nothing to offer. The leader rose, standing tall and radiant. You had everything to offer. You gave us shelter when no one else would. You fed us when you barely had food yourself. You risked your life for ours, when you had nothing to gain. That is more than a hero, guardian. That is family. The words struck deep. Daniel's chest tightened, and for a moment, he could not breathe. He had been cursed by his own kind, locked away for mercy. But here, mercy was the highest honor. In the great hall, the aliens gathered. Their voices rose together in a chant, low, steady, filled with emotion. Daniel could not understand the words, but he understood their meaning. They were telling his story. Not as a prisoner. Not as a traitor. But as the one who had opened a door. The youngest among them stepped forward, carrying a folded cloth. They placed it in Daniel's hands. When he opened it, he gasped. It was a cloak, black as night, lined with silver threads that shimmered like stars. Across the back, stitched carefully, was the circle and line mark. The leader's voice rang clear. Wear this, guardian. It is the mark of who you are, not a number, not a sentence. But the man who gave us tomorrow. Daniel's tears fell freely now. With trembling hands, he draped the cloak across his shoulders. For the first time in 25 years, the weight on his back was not of chains, but of honor. But Earth was not done watching. From orbit, human satellites locked onto the ship. Governments scrambled, their leaders shouting in fear. Some called the aliens invaders. Some demanded war. Yet none could deny what had already happened. Before the eyes of thousands, a prisoner had been lifted into the sky, not by human power, but by strangers who remembered mercy. For years, Earth had seen Daniel as a criminal. But now, whispers began to spread. Who was this man, truly? And why had the strangers risked everything to return for him? In prisons, in slums, in broken places, people began to ask themselves, if a man forgotten by the world could be honored by the stars, what did that mean for the rest of us? Daniel sat quietly, listening to the hum of the ship. The leader stood beside him. Where will you take me? Daniel asked. The leader's voice was steady. To the worlds we built. To the homes you gave us the courage to make. To places where your name is not cursed, but celebrated. Daniel closed his eyes, letting the words sink in. For so long, he had dreamed only of release, of freedom from his cage. But this was more than freedom. This was belonging. You gave us life, the leader continued. Now, we give you a place to live the rest of yours, not in chains, but in honor. Daniel's heart swelled. For the first time in decades, he felt whole. He was not forgotten. He was not lost. He was free. The ship passed into the dark sea of stars. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes wide, his soul alive again. He whispered softly, not to the leader, not to the ship, but to the universe itself. I thought my life ended in a cell. But it was only waiting for this. And as the stars stretched out before him, Daniel finally understood. He had once opened his door to strangers. Now, the universe had opened its doors to him. No chains. No bars. Only freedom. At last.